Hello and welcome to my social anxiety workshop focusing on what actually is social anxiety, why do you have it, and what can you do about it. So I hope you find it helpful. So what we'll go through today are differences in types of social anxiety, the two types of brain centers that are most relevant, why do you experience social anxiety, understanding your unique cycle, and the next steps. So we tend to talk about social anxiety as worrying about what other people think of us as this one broad experience, but actually it tends to fall into two distinct categories. Both involve the fear of judgment, that being negative judgment by others, but they tend to be split into personal situations and performance situations. So interpersonal situations are generally unstructured social situations. So talking to your flatmates, going on a date, speaking to new people, or going to a work networking event. All of these things where there's actually no exact clear rule on how to be. Performance situations, on the other hand, situations that actually have quite clear rules about how you should perform or what's expected of you. So this might be giving a speech, a presentation, a wedding, doing something whilst people are watching, even if that's eating or drinking, anything like that where you're the focus of attention. So interpersonal situations are much more about being accepted, whereas performance situations are much more about being competent. Now, both of them involve this fear of judgment, but they tend to have slightly different motivators. So some people might relate to both, and some people might only have situations that really trigger anxiety in one of these elements. So maybe take a moment here and think about what you relate to the most. Now, this is something I hear all the time from my clients. They know they logically shouldn't feel this way about social situations. They logically know they're not dangerous, but they do. And why? Now, this is a really important question because it's hitting on two different areas of the brain that are involved in this dynamic. So the first area of the brain that's important is the logical brain. So this is also known as the prefrontal cortex, and it's known for that slow, rational, methodical thinking. This is the part of the brain that's probably telling us, you don't need to worry about this. It's not that big of a deal. It's not life and death. And yes, that might be logical, but it's not necessarily helpful. And why is it not helpful? Well, when we're in these high stress situations, it actually activates a different part of our brain, and that is the fear brain. So this is also called the amygdala, which is the part of your brain that is responsible for essentially keeping you safe. Now, when we are anxious, it's likely we're in the fear brain. Now, the fear brain has an evolutionary purpose. So, for example, if you were being chased by a lion, we don't want the logical brain to be like, why is there a lion in my town? Should I run? Do I have a weapon? Who put a lion here? Do I need to call animal control? No, it's too slow. The lion would have eaten us or attacked us by then. And we'd never do that. Why? Because the fear brain would have hijacked us at this point. It would have made us run, hide, flee, or maybe even freeze. But it would have made us take action before we even had time to logically think it through. And then let's say we ran away and it turns out it was just a really big lion-looking dog. Well, on the balance of things, it was better that the fear brain made us run anyway. The problem is, this area of the brain that's responsible for safety can activate on things we don't want it to. And if we're struggling with social anxiety of any of the forms of it, we're likely in the fear brain in that moment. And that's why it's really hard to access your logic in that moment, because the fear brain literally hijacks you to the point where you can't think logically. So that's why if you've ever tried positive thinking, breathing techniques, trying to repeat positive affirmations, they might have helped somewhat, but they might not have really left you with long-term relief. And that's normal because they're working with the logical brain. Effective treatment really works with the fear brain. Now, as I said, we don't have control what the fear brain activates on, but we can retrain it to not activate on things we don't want it to. And that's what effective treatment does. So the fear brain is also responsible for activating the flight system, and I'm not going to go too much into that now, but fundamentally it is responsible for all the physical symptoms we might experience during social situations and a lot of anxious racing thoughts. So I'm going to link a worksheet below a little bit more about fight or flight if you're interested in that. But you might be thinking, well, why does my brain do this? And why is my fear brain more sensitive to these things than other people's? And it's a good question. I like to understand this through something called the biopsychosocial model, which is a really fancy way of basically just saying multiple things overlap to create social anxiety. So the first element is the core element, and this essentially is your biological makeup. So it might be biological tendencies, you might have a naturally more sensitive nervous system. But also, we know that socially traumatic experiences like being bullied, betrayal trauma, all of these things can influence your neurobiology, and therefore I would argue that that is a change in your biology as well. The second area is our social element. So this is the environment we grew up in, our support or lack thereof, all the different social pressures we might face, like culture, gender, all of these things. And our social environment can either enhance our problems or provide a support system for them. Then finally, we have our psychological factors. So these are our thought patterns, our ability to cope, maybe our resilience skills, and our focus of attention over time. This is important to see because, as you can see, two elements of the biopsychosocial model aren't even within your control. So I often hear a lot of people blaming themselves for social anxiety because it's the way they think, the way they feel, or they shouldn't just feel this way. But it's often a really complex interplay between multiple systems that means you experience social anxiety compared to other people who maybe haven't had your unique experiences, which overlaps with your unique psychology. But the good news is, whilst this model overlaps to maintain social anxiety, it can also be used to change it. So for example, by reprocessing social trauma, we're going to make changes in the psychological, but we're also going to make changes in your neurobiology. When you're feeling differently about that, that might change who you choose to be around, which again might influence your social. Also, by learning things like CBT techniques or any other therapy techniques, we're changing our psychological, which again might change how we approach the social, which again is going to be reflected in possible changes in our neurobiology. So this model both is the way in and the way out of social anxiety. But I really put it here to show that if you're struggling with this, it really is not your fault. It is a complex interplay of factors, many of which were outside of your control. So let's look at how social anxiety is maintained today. So I'm going to go through an example as if it was myself, but maybe as we're going through, think about what you relate to or a different example that might be more relevant for you. So the situation is being introduced to a new team at work. And immediately I'm thinking, I'm coming across weird, they can see I'm nervous, they sound stupid, they'll wonder why I hired me, all of these anxious thoughts. And immediately I'm beginning to feel anxious, stressed, but also just really frustrated because I don't want to feel this way. And again, my logical brain is probably in my ear saying, you don't need to worry about this. But the thing is, my fear brain is active. So the fear brain is also triggering my fight or flight system, which is going to make me feel tense, shaky, and my heart is really racing. So to try and control this, I engage in behaviors. So I constantly monitor myself. I over-rehearse what to say before I say it. I have water nearby so I can drink because if I'm drinking, no one can speak to me, and rush through anything I have to say. Now, if you're wondering why this is called safety behavior rather than behavior, it's because it's something we do to prevent a feared outcome from happening. So, for example, drinking water because I'm thirsty is not a safety behavior. Drinking water so that no one can speak to me because I'm too busy drinking is a safety behavior because I'm preventing speaking in case I come across weird, and that's the feared outcome. So you can almost see these safety behaviors akin to the running away from the lion or hiding from the lion. That's what your fear brain does in that moment, but in modern life we can't really do that. So it creates these really clever ways to deal with it in the situation by these subtle behaviors that try to keep us safe. Now, whilst all of this is going on, I'm also having a self-image. You might also call this self-consciousness or the spotlight effect. But fundamentally, it's that image of ourselves we get, the way we feel we're coming across or the way other people are seeing us. So I'm having this idea that I'm a nervous babbling wreck. I can see myself in front of other people like tripping up on words, images of myself being awkward, and that sensation of the spotlight effect, attention really on me. Now, for some people, this is really a clear image, almost like they're watching a film of their life. And for other people, it's more a felt sensation or thoughts. Also, For some people, this is a little distorted. And what I mean by that is the image isn't something that could even be real, but that is what the fear brain is projecting to you in that very moment. So an example of that would be you see yourself as being really small and everybody really tall and looking down on you, and you're just this weak, small creature. Now, of course, we know that nothing has changed in anyone's height, but the fear brain is projecting its ideas of inferiority and superiority to that image in the moment in your mind. Now, pause for a moment here because there's arrows all over this diagram, and take a moment to think what they might represent. So maybe you've got it, maybe you haven't. Either way, it's okay. But maybe you've got it that the arrows represent that this is a cycle that maintains social anxiety. So the anxious thoughts we have then create anxious emotions, which then lead to this self-image. The idea of the self-image creates even more anxiety, which creates even more physical symptoms, which probably makes the self-image feel worse. Then we do more safety behaviors to try to control it, but then we might worry about the way our safety behaviors are being perceived. For example, do people think I'm weird because I'm now drinking too much? Which again increases the anxious self-image, and it becomes really entrapping, and it's really hard to break out of. And the more we kind of snowball through this cycle, the more the fear brain is alerting, and this is where it becomes very hard to access logic. So if you are stuck in a cycle like this, it's not your fault. It's completely understandable, and it was very difficult to break out of alone. Now, one thing to say is I started with thoughts first. It could also be emotions first. It could also be the self-image first. There's no right way round. I've just synthesized it this way to make it easy to read. And another thing to say is some people don't really have that sort of voice in their head that gives them thoughts. It's more images, and so you might not have the thoughts element of this at all, and both of those things would be totally normal. Now, my intention is that you begin to live a life through effective treatment where you can see your self-image for what it truly is and not what anxiety tells you you are. Because at the crux of social anxiety is a difference between how you think you're being perceived in this self-image versus how you are actually being perceived. I know it can be hard to really imagine that you're not perceived negatively when you're deep in the throes of social anxiety, but that is part of social anxiety. It convinces you that what it's telling you is true, and I want you to live a life where it's not and you don't believe it. Now, just a little bit of an afterthought here. As I was recording this course, I noticed that I've got mistakes on this page. I've got constantly monitor myself, spelt wrong here. I've got sound stupid with a typo there. And I sat and thought, should I delete and re-record this? And I definitely could. It wouldn't take me much effort. But I guess I want to take this as an opportunity to say, you don't need to be socially perfect. I could sit here and think people who watch this are going to think I'm so stupid that I don't know what I'm saying, that it's so embarrassing to upload things with a typo. And I could delete the whole thing, or I could go back and edit it. But on the balance of things, I believe, or maybe hope, that this video provides useful information, and I don't believe that on the balance of things that anyone would take small typos and turn that into a general statement about somebody. And if they did, I'd argue that shows more about them and them being uncomfortable with small imperfections than me. So I'm going to leave this out here on the internet, wide world, to see that there's a mistake here, and I'm okay with it. And I hope that gives you some permission to also make mistakes socially, and that it's okay. It doesn't mean anything about you or your ability or your competence. Now, I gave an example of thoughts during the situation, but a lot of people also struggle with anticipatory social anxiety, and a lot of people also struggle with post-event rumination. And essentially what that means is stewing and going over and over the situation and reliving it, and then this cycle continuing afterwards. So all of these things, both before, during, and after, can trigger a really difficult cycle. And another element is that for a lot of people, this self-image, whether consciously or unconsciously, can also be linked to a traumatic social experience. So for this example, I might be reliving a traumatic experience where I was humiliated and was nervously babbling in front of the class and everybody laughed at me. Now, some people are reliving that image very consciously, others it's unconscious. And I hear from a lot of people, once they're adults, well, I should just get over it. It wasn't a big deal. And again, this is the logic speaking. Yes, we can say in the scheme of life that maybe this wasn't a big deal objectively, but the thing is, socially traumatic experiences are encoded in the fear brain, and we don't have any choice about that. So the fear brain is really going to be hypervigilant of anything that reminds us of it, whether that's something we're conscious of or not. Now, that's not for everybody. Some people don't have these experiences and experience social anxiety. Both would be normal, but I'm just putting it there if this is something you relate to, that it's completely normal. And no, you don't need to just get over it. These are real experiences that really impact your brain and your psychology. Now, one thing I really want to say, and this is often a critique of CBT, of which that cycle is from CBT, is that we've identified the problem as within you. It's your thoughts, your behaviors, your emotions, you're getting stuck here. And whilst we have to take some responsibility for our own psychological factors, I do want to highlight that we exist in a very real social environment that has very large consequences on how we interpret social situations. So that's going to be culture pressure, gender pressure, all of the discriminatory isms like sexism, etc. What I'm saying is, we can't separate ourselves from the environment that we are in. So all of these external factors really influence what it means if we are not socially accepted, and the meaning and consequence of that. And I'm just putting it here so that these are very real elements that really do influence, and they come back to that social element that we were talking about earlier. Whilst we can't do much about the societies we live in, I think it's worth recognizing and validating that they do have a real impact on the consequence of what it means when we feel like we might not be accepted or rejected from a group. So, your turn now. Whilst this is fresh in your mind, create your own cycle, of which there's a link to a blank page for you to do one below the video. And then over the week, maybe when you notice your difficulties coming up, create another one to capture it. Now, why? I understand that most people are like, I just want to change. I want techniques, help me change this. And I totally get it. But the thing is, if you're doing one-to-one therapy with me, or you're in one of my courses, a lot of the skills and techniques to break those cycles and change your self-image rest on your ability to understand exactly what's going on for you, the types of cycles that happened, and exactly your kind of self-image, the fear and the meaning attached to this. So understanding your unique cycle is the first step to breaking it. So worksheets and templates are linked below so that you can use those. So take a week to do this, or more if you need, and I look forward either to seeing you in one-to-one therapy or seeing you in Module 2 if you're on the Overcoming Social Anxiety course. Now, if you come to this video through YouTube or somewhere else and you're ready to transform social anxiety, whether that's interpersonal, performance, or both, into authentic confidence, then if you'd like to connect further, I offer one-to-one therapy and coaching. I have my online course, Overcoming Social Anxiety and Building Confidence, of which this video is the first module, or you can also connect with me on Instagram @_sociallyfearless.